All right, Tabosai, good evening. Good evening. Let us begin. Baruch Hashem. A lot to do tonight. So we left off. First of all, I neglected to mention it last night, but the shir this week, Baruch Hashem, is dedicated by Derek and Lauren Fine and Larry and Laura Franks in the Schusa Refuah Shalema for Adiva Berkowitz. Adiva Li Bas Dina. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, she will have a complete and enduring refuah. Thank you for the sponsorship. All right, so with that, let us begin. So we are picking up Emir Hashem tonight on the bottom of Yud Aleph Mabez 11b at the two dots. It is actually a really beautiful Gemara tonight. It is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, about 15 lines up from the bottom. So the Gemara says as follows. Tan Rabbanon. Sorry, Tanan Hasam. Amar Mamuna. So it's actually a very beautiful Gemara. The Mamuna is the Kohen who is in charge of all of the other Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Mamuna said to the other Kohanim, so just to give you context over here, take a quick look at Rashi. So Rashi says over here, Amar Mamuna, Husgan HaKohanim, Kedeisa Biyuma, Hainu Skan, Hainu Mamuna. So the Mamuna is the Skan Kohen Gadol, the assistant Kohen Gadol. So remember again, it was his job to get everyone going in the morning, to get all the Kohanim. So he would say to them as follows, Baruchu bracha achos. Make a bracha. Make one bracha. Now we'll discuss exactly which bracha is being recited over here, but go ahead and make one bracha. Baruchu bracha achos, veheim baruchu, so they would make the bracha. And ultimately again, v'karu aser sadibros, they would recite aser sadibros, 10 commandments, Shema, vayam shema, vayomer, Ubaruchu esam gimel brachas. Then they would bless the people with the gimel brachas. Gimel brachas are the birchas kuna. Yivarecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Yar Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Emes v'yatziv v'avoda. They would recite the bracha of avoda, which is the bracha of ritzei. Ubirchas kohanim. And again, Berachas Kohanim, Ubishabis Mosifin Bracha Achos Lemishmar Yosei. And on Shabbos, they would add in one additional bracha for the departing Kohanic shift. So we'll discuss exactly Emir Hashem what all of these different things are over here. So as says the Gemara, let's analyze. Good. My bracha achos. Suppose I remember again. It began by the Mamuna would say to them, Baruchu bracha achos. Make a bracha. Which bracha? What are we referring to over here? Ki had Rabbi Abba Yossi bar Abba iklalahu asra ba'minei. So again, I'll say this is a question that was asked. Rabbi Yossi bar Abba went to a particular city, and there they asked, "My bracha achos. What's the one bracha that the Kohanim were making first thing in the morning?" Lo hava biyadayu. Didn't have the answer. Va'asu shaylu Rav Masna. They went to ask Rav Masna. Lo hava biyadei. Rav Masna didn't know the answer either. Asu shaylu Rav Yehuda. They went and they asked Rav Yehuda. Amrlu achi Amr Shmuel avarabba. What's the one bracha? Avarabba. So also say, interestingly enough, in the Beis HaMikdash, the first bracha that the Kohanim would start with would be the bracha of Avarabba. Now, based on what we learned last night, why start with Avarabba? Because Avarabba, right, is a beautiful bracha, but it also could satisfy what obligation? Birchas HaTorah. So technically speaking, it's kind of like one-stop shopping. You get everything in there. So the Gemara says as follows: Am Rabbi Zrika, Am Rabbi Ami, Am Rabbi Shimon Lakish, Yotze'ar. Said no, it was the bracha of Yotze'ar. Kias Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Amar Had Rabbi Zrika La Beferush Itmar Al Mechlala Itmar. Rabbi Zrika's statement that it was Yotze'ar wasn't said explicitly, rather it was inferred. What was it inferred from? Rabbi Zrika, Am Rabbi Ami, Am Rabbi Shimon Lakish. Zos Someres Brachos Ein Ma'akvos Zu at Zu. Well, so you see from here, in general, we have this concept that brachos ein makvos. Brachos ein makvos means sometimes you have an obligation in a series of brachos. What happens if you don't say all of them, but you say one of them? Is the inability or failure to say one, does that go ahead and potentially negate everything else? So when we say brachos ein makvos zu at zu, that means even if for some reason you can't say one bracha, that doesn't preclude you from saying the other. Now you're saying the other. So the Gemara says, now listen to this. So the Gemara says, if you say in the base, they said Yotze'ar, Hainu de brachos in ma'akvos zu azu. Then it makes sense that we say brachos in ma'akvos zu azu, because even though they only said Yotze'ar, but they didn't say Avarabba, you see again that they're still allowed to say Yotze'ar. However, the Gemara says, zu azu, Deloka Amri Avarabba, top of your base, Ella, 12a, Ella I Amrit Avarabba Hava Amri. But if they in fact said Avarabba, my brachos in ma'akvos zu zu. Then again, what raya do you have? What proof do you have that failure to recite bless you, that failure to recite one bracha undermines the other, the ability to say the other. After all, you could say, Dilma, Haidelo, Amri Yotze Ar, Mishum Delo Matazman Yotze Ar. I will say, it could very well be that in the Beis HaMikdash, the reason why they did not say the bracha of Yotze Ar was why? Because they were getting up and starting their day before daybreak. So maybe they were just unable to say Yotze Ar because it was not yet light outside. V'chi matazman Yotze Ar have Amri. And ultimately, again, when the time of Yotze Ar, i.e. daybreak would come, then they would recite it. V'mechlala mai, and if you just infer it, what would it be? From the mechlala, the olam avarabba havu amri. Possible that maybe they did say avarabba. The chimatuz man yotze ar havu amri, and when the time daybreak came, they would say yotze ar. Or my brachos in ma'akva zuazu. What does it mean when it says brachos or not ma'akiv each other? Say the brachos. That even if you say brachos out of order, ultimately again you still fulfill the obligation. Okay, so I'll say it's beautiful. So now we're going to spend a little bit of time, actually, interestingly enough, talking about what they did in the Beis HaMikdash. It's actually quite amazing. So remember, in the Beis HaMikdash, they would start with bracha achos. What was the bracha achos? Avarabba. They would start with avarabba, and then remember again, the rest of the order was, and afterwards, they said Aseres HaDibros. They said the 10 Commandments. So this is actually really interesting Gemara. The Koran Aseres HaDibros, Shema v'ya'im shamoa, emes v'yatz, v'yomer, emes yatze v'avoda berchas kohanim. So they would say Aseres HaDibros, 10 Commandments, Shema, v'ya'im shamoa, right? Emes v'yatziv, avoda, which is the bracha of Ritzei, and berchas kohanim. So says the Gemara, Amr Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel, af bigvulin bikshu likros came. Well, this is actually an incredible Gemara. The rabbis wanted to institute the recitation of 10 Commandments in Shema. In Shema. Oh, so you could hear that. Just to point out, it is interesting that Aseres HaDibros, 10 Commandments, is not part of davening. Right? After all, again, everything, remember again, Reb Saji Gaon brings down that all 613 mitzvos can be learned out from the 10 Commandments. Right? It's like the foundation. So it is intriguing that other that at the end of the day we don't go ahead and say Aseres HaDibros. Yeah, and by the way, what's even more intriguing is in the Beis HaMikdash they did say Aseres HaDibros. They did say 10 Commandments as part of the davening, so to speak, of the Kohanim. So the Gemara talks about that historically the rabbis tried to institute the recitation of Aseres HaDibros in Shema. Now, by the way, how do you do that in Shema? So it's very simple. Remember, Shema, as we read it in the Siddur, that's not the way it appears in the Torah, right? It's not, those paragraphs do not appear consecutively in the Torah. Shema and V'yahafta are together, but ultimately, again, Vayom Shama and Vayomer are separate. So you could put Aseres HaDibros in between any of those paragraphs. So that's what they wanted to do. But rather, what happened? But then, after they either they instituted it and then they revoked it, or probably they just never ended up instituting it. Why? They were afraid, Rabbi say, about Taromas Haminin means literally the complaints of the non-believers. But the way Rashi understands it over here is ultimately there was a concern that ignorant people would think that since the 10 Commandments were included, those are the only things that matter. Right? All you have to worry about is the 10 Commandments. Don't worry about anything else. So in order not to lend greater importance to one part of the Torah over other parts, so what did the rabbis do? They removed it. Tanya Nami Hachi, Bryce that supports Rabbi Nosson over Bigvulin, Bikshu Likros came right outside of Eretz Yisrael. Actually, that says outside of Yerushalayim. They also wanted to go and institute the reading of Aseres HaDibros as part of Shema. But the rabbis decided against it. Why? Ultimately, again, because literally of the disbelievers, the non-believers. In other words, a concern that people are going to say, oh, you see, Aseres HaDibros are included in Shema because they and only they are important. Nothing else is important. Rabbi Rachana wanted to institute the reading of the 10 Commandments in Shema, in Surah. Surah was a major city in Babylonia, in Babel. You can't do that, because the rabbis already said you can't do it because of the non-believers. Amimar said, Amimar wanted to institute the reading of the Aseres HaDibros in Shema in Nardan, another major Babylonian city. You can't do it, because the rabbis already said, you can't do it because ignorant people are going to end up thinking that halacha l'maaseh, the only thing that matters are the Aseres HaDibros and nothing else matters. Also, by the way, Aseres HaDibros, God said them, so it could lead to just a lot of theological confusion. Therefore, we do not include it. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. This Gemara also is the subject of an interesting dispute. There are different minhagim about should one stand up, right? When we read Aseres Hadibros on Shul, should one stand up for Aseres Hadibros? So many of the posts can bring down, absolutely not. They say like this: if you normally stand up for Torah reading, continue standing. But if you don't stand up for Torah reading, do not stand up for the Ten Commandments. Why? Why not? Same problem. Why are you standing up for this and not everything else? It must be because you're ascribing greater importance to Aseres Hadibros than to everything, and that's theologically problematic. Rabbi Soloveitchik, Zecher Tzadik Libracha, held that one is permitted to stand up for Aseres Hadibros. He says, why? Why do we stand for Aseres Hadibros? It's something amazing. He says, when we read Aseres Hadibros, what we're trying to do is recreate what occurred historically. When our ancestors received the Torah at Har Sinai, they were all standing. They were all standing. Therefore, again, when we read Aseres Hadibros specifically on Shavuos, what we're trying to do is recreate Sinaitic revelation. They stood, and therefore we stand. We're not standing up to ascribe greater importance to one section of the Torah over something else. Rather, we're just trying to recreate that which occurred. So very interesting. So just point out, it is a raging dispute in halacha whether or not one who normally sits for Kriyas Torah should stand up for Aseres Hadibros, and know that the core of that dispute is right here in this Gemara. Pretty incredible. All right, Ubishavas Mosif and Bracha Achas Mishmar Yosei. So remember again, we went through the entire order of davening for the Kohanim when they got up. The Gemara now mentions that on Shabbos, they would add in one more bracha for the departing shift. Now remember again, Kohanim, right? So there's too many Kohanim to serve simultaneously in the Beis HaMikdash. So remember, what did they do? What did the rabbis do? They split up the Kohanim into what we call 24 mishmoros, 24 watches, 24 shifts. Now, each shift was comprised of multiple batei avos, multiple families. Right? Now, obviously, multiple families, you have multiple kohanim. So what happens is each mishmar, right? Each mishmar would serve for 1 week in the Beis HaMikdash. Over the course of that week, different families got to do different things. When do the shifts switch? On Shabbos. Actually quite beautiful. On Shabbos, ultimately, again, the new shift comes in, the old shift goes out. That's also, remember, again, when the old shift goes out, they get the lechem aponim, right? They get the loaves of bread, the 12 loaves, right, on the table, on the shulchan. So they go out. And actually, so beautifully, the Gemara says that what would happen? The incoming shift would give a bracha to the departing shift. And they said it says, my bracha achas, Rabbi Chalbo, mishmar hayotzi, I'm sorry, just the opposite. Mishmar hayotzi, omer mishmar nichnas. The departing shift would say to the incoming shift, Misha shachar shmo b'ayis hazeh, he who rests his name in this home, hu yashkin beinechem ava v'achvav shalom v'reyos. He should rest upon you, ultimately, he should cause to rest upon you, literally love and brotherhood, peace and camaraderie. We'll say it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful bracha. Now we'll say why do the Kohanim have to give each other that bracha? So we'll say remember for Kohanim serving in the Beis Hamikdash, this was also a source of parnasa. How is it a source of parnasa? You're getting two things. You're getting meat and potentially hides. And I will say, nothing causes greater strife between people than money. So therefore, again, it's so beautiful. So the departing shift says to the incoming shift, listen, this is a house of peace. This is a house of shalom. This is a house of achva, shalom, v'reyas. The same way the Ribbon Shalom, who is the Ribbon Shalom of peace, rests his name. So there should be peace. Don't fight over the steak. Don't fight over the hide, right? There's enough for everyone. Parnasa comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But also in general, it's also a very good musar. You know where else we do this? We also do this at a wedding, right? By a wedding. So Minhag Yisrael is we sign Tanaim. Even though, again, Tanaim are an agreement between families, and we don't really have like these formalized, right? Technically speaking, if you didn't do Tanaim at a wedding, you're fine, right? Nothing happens. Wedding is still good, right? But the Tanaim essentially says whatever financial agreements the families entered into, they're going to honor. And it's actually very beautiful that in the Tanaim itself, it says, Yishlatun b'nechseyon shava b'shava b'shalom achvares. That in the Tanaim itself, there's a bracha that finances shouldn't get in between the chassan and kala. Right? We know this, right? Money causes stress, or lack of money, or I guess surplus of money. Either one could cause stress, right? But lamaisa. So it's interesting that the bracha we give to the chassan and kala before their chuppah is money shouldn't drive a wedge between you. Money shouldn't. So what happens? The outgoing shift says to the incoming shift, this is a place of peace. Money shouldn't drive a wedge between you. It's so beautiful. The Gemara goes weiter. So makom shomer laharich. So let's go weiter. So now remember, the Mishnah said as follows. The Mishnah spoke about, again, the structure of brachas. Now remember, again, in the structure of brachas, what the Mishnah said was as follows. If there's a bracha that's a prolonged bracha, so you shouldn't go ahead and truncate it. And if it's a shorter bracha, you shouldn't go ahead and elongate it. In other words, however the rabbis set down the brachas, that's the way it should remain. That's the way it should remain. Okay, so the Gemara says this also, pshita, that's obvious. Hey, so listen to this, Shabbos say. So pshita, this is a great case. Heichad de karnakit kasad de chamra biyadeh, de kasav de shechra. Shabbos say, watch this. I pick up a glass of wine in my hand, but I thought it was beer. Right? I thought it was beer. Now, why does this matter? So first of all, clearly I don't know anything about wine. If I think that there's a cup of beer and I'm holding it, but all right. So let's say bracha. Right? Obviously, bracha on wine is shahak, is beri priagafen, and bracha on beer is shahakol. So watch this. So now I picked up the glass of wine, but I thought it was beer. Upasach umevarich adaita de shichra. So when I say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, I'm having in mind that how am I going to end that bracha? How am I going to end it? Shakol niyeh b'dvaro, because I think I'm holding beer. However, again, right before I add in the suffix of the bracha, I'm like, oh, that's wine. So I say borei priagafen. So it's an interesting case. So when I began the bracha, I had in mind that it was going to be a shahakol, but I ended it off with hagafen. So what's the halacha? Yatsa. That works. You're yotze. Why are you yotze? Di'i namim amar shakol niya b'dvaro yatsa. Because what's the worst case scenario? What's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is you finish that bracha with the shahakol. But say if you make shahakol over wine, what's the halacha? You're yotze. Why? Shahakol works for everything. Disnan. Al kulam im amar shakol niya b'dvaro yatsa. The halacha is, I will say, that if you make a shakol on anything, you are yotze. So we'll say, so it's an interesting case. So that case, and we'll say, well, that's halacha l'maisa. So I pick up the glass, it's a glass of wine, I think it's a cup of beer, a glass of beer. I say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, with such kavanah, ready to say shakol niyeh b'dvaro, but then I look down and say, oh, it's wine, bari priagafen, you yotze. Because worst case scenario, even had you finished it off with shakol niyeh b'dvaro, you'd still be yotze. Watch this. Elahecha, dekanakit kasa de shechra biyadeh, vekasar de chamruhu. Watch this. But what about the reverse case? I pick up a cup of wine, right? I pick up a cup of beer, right? And ultimately, again, I thought it was wine. So pasach ubarach adaita de chamra. So I go ahead and I say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, thinking that how am I going to end it? Borei priagafen. And then I realize, oh, it's beer. V'siyem b'deshichra. And then I ended it off ultimately again with shakol niyeh b'dvaro. So what's the halacha? Basar ikar bracha azlinon, o basar chasima azlinon. So Rabbi say, here's the shaila. So now, how do you look at this bracha? So right, you hear this case? I picked up a cup of beer. Right? But ultimately, again, I thought it was wine. So therefore, when I said the first part of the bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, I was sure that I was going to end it with borei priagafen. Then it turned out that I was wrong. It's beer. So I ended it off in the right way. So the beginning of the bracha was recited with the intention of borei priagafen. The end of the bracha was recited ultimately again, shakol niyeh b'dvaro. Now remember, had you ended it off borei priagafen, what would have been the halacha? Doesn't work. You can't make hagafen on beer. It doesn't work. Shabbos says, now here's the shaila. The shaila is, is the bracha effective or not? I will say, what does the shaila come down to? Basar ikar bracha azlinan. Do we go after your intention at the time of the primary part of the bracha? Now what's the primary part of the bracha? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. What we call Shem umalchus. Right? The name of God and the monarchical identity of God. Is that what determines the effectiveness of the bracha? Or chasima, is it how we conclude the bracha? That's the fundamental shaila. Do we go after the ikar, Shem HaMalchus, or do we go after the end of both sides? We'll stop over here for tonight. We'll leave you on a cliffhanger. I know, it's hard. Who's going to be able to sleep tonight? Right? Again, leave on the cliffhanger also, but this is going to have dramatic ramifications of brachas, because remember, halacha l'maisa, I think that this happens all of the time. And I'll tell you where it happens. Not necessarily that you're not sure about the food that you are holding, but rather what? But rather maybe you're not sure something about the bracha that you're making, right? You begin, I'm thinking, busy smiling, this happens, right? Happens all the time, right? You're right, you're holding that food, that drink. I just had this last night. Whatever. And so you begin thinking you're going to make one bracha. Again, there's no food confusion. There's bracha confusion. But the problem is literally when I was reciting the Shem of Hashem and Malchus and Monarcha, I had in mind to end it one way, and then I ended up ending it a different way. Is that an effective bracha or not? The Meretz Hashem, to be continued tomorrow. We'll say, Shkoyach. And tremendous shkoyach to Reb Shmuel again for all the beverages. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry? Tomorrow's going to be Siyam.